Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors episode 330. Woo. As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by resident old bastard Chris Saturn.
330 is a big number. I feel
It's
like the numbers
high,
keep
right?
getting bigger.
We're coming up on enough that you could listen to an episode of the show every day of the year.
That's crazy.
Right now, you'd have to cut out holidays to get there.
Yeah.
But give us time.
Maybe some weekends.
Give us time. We'll make it. As far as housekeeping, I'm still sick. And so if I'm making like throat clearing noises or coughing, that's why. I'm sorry. I'm just still sick because I was sick
I didn't
during
hear
the last show.
any throat clearing noises at all
Good.
the last show.
I hit it perfectly.
Yeah.
You'll never know. But yeah, so if I sound a little under the
Off.
weather, that's why. It's because I am under the weather.
That's fair.
And I was thinking about bumping the
What does
show,
that
but
phrase
then it's
mean?
Halloween weekend. Do what?
What does that phrase mean? Under
The weather? Well, the weather's above me and I'm under it.
Oh, perfect.
Right. And that means that I'm getting weather on me.
Is it?
And
Is that what
so,
that means?
yeah, when you're under the weather, it's because you get the weather on you.
And that's, like, I know what the phrase means, but it's never made sense to me. That's just been a nonsense phrase my entire life.
It would only make sense if it was possible to not be under the weather.
Right. That's the thing. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Anyway, my week is basically been nothing. My kid has been so consistently sick since September 6th. It is like October 29th right now.
Correct. But they think they found something, right?
They finally were like, oh, both of her ears are very infected. I was like, oh, that's great.
Right.
So I've just been dealing with a sick kid. And of course, the school is like, hey, you legally have to send her to school. And I'm like, well, you need to legally quit sending her home every time.
Right.
So it's just been crazy. It got to a point where I was like taking days off work and just like doing nothing with them because I was just overwhelmed.
Yeah, I hear you.
And we're just barreling right into the holidays, which at least those are so stress-free.
Right. They are for me. But at least they've got something to treat that particular issue.
Well, I was talking about this in Discord. Some people may not know this, but when you have a small child, like under 6, 99% of the time you go to the doctor, they don't give you anything. They go, oh yeah, it's probably this. We can't give them anything.
Get plenty of rest.
You get plenty of rest, fluids.
Get some Tylenol kids version.
They always say fluids, like I'm gonna be like, fluids, yeah. Oh, fuck, I knew we were forgetting some. We were just giving her solids. I told my wife, I was like, honey, we need to put fluids in her too. And she was like, no, just chicken nuggets.
I've just been giving her salt lick all the time.
The electrolytes. And so it's 90% of the time they don't give you anything. They're like, it sucks, just tough it out. And while I was there, I was like, she's been sick for like over a month. Is that normal? And she goes, she's in kindergarten this year, right? And I go, yeah. And she goes, oh yeah. She's gonna just be sick for kindergarten. And I was like, that's horrible.
Right.
This is the worst.
Yeah, that sucks.
But as a result, I've just not played. I've not been playing much, man. Anything. I literally sat there in the notes and I was like, what did I play? I had to have played something. There's no way I didn't play anything. I don't think I have played
You played
nothing.
Metroid.
Right, I played well, that was for the show though.
Right.
So I still got the Metroid going on in this week's topic, but that's it. Just nothing else.
I started the re-release of Fatal Frame 5 on Xbox.
I saw that.
It's still spooky. It did a good job there. It is really, really oversaturated. And like it's super bright. And so I went into the settings menu to the brightness thing and it's like adjust your brightness so that this ghost is barely visible. And like I crank the brightness all the way down so it should be super dark and I can still clearly see that stupid fucking ghost.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what, okay. And I go back to the game and you know how like on sitcoms when it's showing the sitcom couple's bedroom and it's all got that blue glow, the entire fucking game has that blue glow. And I was like, what is going on? And then I realized the game has no HDR. Not even the auto HDR is on.
Yeah.
And that just makes the game feel...
just no range.
Yeah, so it just feels super saturated. All the dark areas are just like bright blue. And it's distracting me, but it's still, it's still a fine game. But I didn't intend to talk about the game that much. But so what I really spent time doing was I was trying to buy books. So...
I'm sorry, what?
So I had gotten, like, for years, anytime that I read a book, I've just been buying them on my phone or tablet because it's convenient. Because I mostly read
always in front of you.
Yeah, I mostly read at night, and I don't want to deal with having the light on. So if I just have my tablet, it's backlit and everything's fine. But at work, I won a little raffle, and I got this shitty little $5 book light.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, I should use this book light. And I went and looked at my books, and I was like, well, I've read all these. So I tried to buy some used books, and I learned that it really sucks trying to buy used books online.
Oh, man, let me tell you about it. Halftime you get it, and you're like, oh, the spine is completely sheared off the side of this book.
Yeah, like I used to buy used books on this one website that was named after a river or some shit, but it turns out they want to sell literally everything but that now.
Yeah.
And buying used books there, it's like, oh, buy from all of these other resellers. And I'm like,
Half Price Books sells, and they don't usually take totally destroyed books.
So the thing is, with Half Price Books' website, they charge shipping on literally every individual item in your order.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Because it's all coming from different stores. And even if it's coming from the same store, they still charge individual shipping on each item.
You just go to a Half Price Books.
So I went to Half Price Books. And I bought a handful of books, but there were a couple in the series they didn't have. So I was like, well, I'll try to buy them online. And the shipping on Half Price Books website was exorbitant. And Amazon either didn't have them, they're way overpriced for some reason. And Barnes & Noble doesn't carry them because they're out of print. So I go to eBay and I find some on eBay and I'm like, all right, well, this is cheap. I can buy this. And so I buy a couple of them. And they arrive and they're used library books. And so they're covered in those stickers that don't come off. Yeah. And like the entire cover is entirely covered in tape.
Yeah.
And it's a paperback. So so it's just destroyed. And
I'll be honest, I have a tendency to tape my paperbacks on my own.
I can't do that. So and so I'm just like upset because it's just so destroyed that I can barely hold it, and like the inner pages are like hanging out of it because of how wet. At what point
do you just shell out for a new book at Barnes and Noble?
It's out of print. I can't buy it.
Oh my god.
So I'm frustrated, and I'm trying to find a couple of books that just apparently you can't fucking get unless you want to pay Amazon $40 for a used copy.
You may check Biblio.
Oh.
Usually Biblio is kind of reserved for like collectors and first editions and stuff, but you can find a lot of people just selling kind of regular out of print stuff.
Yeah, I just want a shitty trade paperback of it.
Yeah, you might check Biblio.
Yeah, I might try that. So I'm I'm frustrated.
Can I just say how very, like, of course I know you read.
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't know. Let me phrase it differently. I know that growing up you read.
Right.
And you saying, oh, this is what I did this week, and it not be a video game is very disorienting to me.
Yeah, well, that's because I normally play enough games that I have games I can talk about on the show.
I feel like you've secretly been reading books and not saying anything, and now I'm like, well, what books are you reading? Well, it's like finding out there's this whole facet of you that I had no idea. But then, of course, in my head, I'm like, he likes reading books. He's talked about books a million times.
Yeah, I do. I read shitty trash horror novels all the time. But it's just they're not interesting, so I don't talk about them on the show. But yeah, I do. I'll collect shitty trash horror novels and shitty trash vampire novels and read those all the time. And I was trying to get some physical copies of some of the ones that I haven't read yet, and you fucking can't. And they're also not available digitally as ebooks, and that also pisses me off.
You know what you could do is you could pirate them.
I did find some pirated copies of them, even though they're not available.
Print them out, and then use your booklight on the printed papers.
Perfect. That's the solution. That's what I was missing.
I love that all of this started because you're like, well, I got a booklight.
Yeah, well, now I have to.
Well, I gotta buy books, and then it's like, well, I got books. I guess I gotta buy a bookshelf to put them on, and I gotta buy an apartment to put my bookshelf in.
That is true. I bought a bookshelf because the shelves were full.
Apartment, I guess I gotta feed myself so I can live to read the books.
I better get a fucking job. No, I did buy another bookshelf because my bookshelf was full.
My God.
But no, I was like, if I've got this booklight, I might as well get some books to read with it. And I was like, well, this other series by this author was never made available digitally. I guess I'll go buy that. And then I go out to buy it, and it's a fucking nightmare Because it used to be back in the day.
Ask at Half Price Books. I think they can transfer between stores.
I did ask, and they were like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, yeah, you do, because you have book 4 right here. I have it in my hand. I'm about to buy it from you. They're like,
do you want to buy it?
I don't see this author. I'm like, you do. It's in my hand. So I don't know if like they're just not training the staff now or what. So it's
I feel like Half Price Books used to be real good about like. I feel like the staff used to be real good and helpful there.
Yeah, and
now they just want $400 for Pokemon Gold and don't know what a book is.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird.
Anyway, let's do the news.
Yes, sir.
There's not much of it. We're still in that kind of weird pre-holiday lull.
Right.
Suda51's Grasshopper manufacturer is acquired by Chinese publisher NetEase.
It's frustrating, but Suda51 did come out and say that he still has creative liberty and he is still just going to keep doing the same weird shit he did before. And I hope that is true, and I hope that it is still made as readily available as it has been in the past. But it is worrying to see these handful of companies that we had not even heard about until the last 4 or 5 years.
A lot of them are Chinese mobile focused companies.
Right.
A lot of this. What's the other big one?
Tencent.
Yeah. Tencent. I think Tencent is still the biggest video game company in the world. Just
I believe
by
so. Yeah.
volume of what they own.
And NetEase is coming in. They're buying the Yakuza guys. They're buying Grasshopper manufacturer. So, and I don't know if that means that they are trying to get into console development or if they're trying to bring these developers into mobile development. And so that part is what
I think what bothers me about stuff when they're like, oh, well, I still have creative control and, we're still going to be doing the same thing, just different name. What bothers me about that is that they never finish the sentence. The rest of the sentence is, as long as it's making as much money as our new parent company wants.
Right. Yeah.
We will have creative control and continue doing the same stuff as long as it performs the way they want it to.
Yeah.
Because that's the paradigm that has changed. Why would they buy something and then immediately change it?
Right.
You only buy something because you want what it
value.
is right now. Right. And so it could be this thing where it's like, yeah, of course you're going to keep making your weird Suda51 shit for now. Yeah. And then what if the next couple games don't make much money and they're like, well, hey, let's throw in a mobile spinoff to tie in, just to kind of even out some revenue. And then next time they go, well, maybe we don't need the console. We just start with the mobile game, and that's the main game. And they every time they explain it away by being like, well, these were the necessary steps we had to take. Well, this is where we had to go with it. We still have our integrity. And it's like, at what point do you realize that by virtue of that purchase, you've now put your integrity on a potential chopping block at some point?
Now, in fairness, I don't think Japan will care too much if they end up going mobile exclusive.
No, I doubt it. Japan would love it,
But the rest of us would be a little concerned by that.
So I don't know. And then this isn't me trying to like shit all over Suda51 or anything like that. Like, of course, that's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
He's not going to come out and be like, we're going to do totally different shit now, and it's going to be shitty and no one's going to like it. Like, what's he supposed to say, right? Like,
I hope you didn't like Travis' touchdown because we're fucking burying him.
He's dead! But I called Nintendo and I asked what to do, and they said, fucking kill him! I don't know. I just wanted to be clear that like that's why it bothers me. It's not that I'm like, oh, I just can't stand that these companies are buying up other companies. That's what companies do. That's what companies have always done. So what they'll continue to do. What bothers me is this whole thing where people try to assure us that they're going to have this artistic integrity, and it's like, yeah, you will. Yeah, as long as it's making enough money.
Yeah, just like Maxis got to keep its creative integrity, and PopCap got to keep their creative integrity.
Whereas Grasshopper manufacturer on their own might be okay eating some losses for a vision that they have.
Right.
Sega might be okay eating some losses for whatever Yakuza is going to be next. They might be more okay with that than just some big faceless parent company, right? Although I guess Sega's had a big faceless parent company for a long time.
For quite a number. For really their entire life, they've had one.
I mean, if Sonic 06 taught us anything, it's that Sega's willing to eat losses for no reason. And that's a good place to be, right?
Yeah, Sega's willing to eat losses and pretend like that was their creative vision.
What if Sonic kisses like a regular girl?
And then he becomes a wolf hog.
That's what it's werehog, okay?
Okay, first of all, the prefix were means human, so it's not werehog. That makes no sense. That would mean
I
he's a
checked.
person
He's
who
called a
turns into a
werehog.
pig. Anyway. That was always my biggest complaint about that stupid fucking game. The entire game should be a complaint, but the language is my biggest
At least
complaint.
call him a were-hedgehog. It still doesn't
That
quite
still
make sense,
doesn't
but
make
it's
sense.
closer.
A
right?
were-hedgehog is a person that turns into a hedgehog.
Right, no, but it makes more sense than a were-hog,
doesn't.
which, as you stated, is a man that turns into a pig, not a hedgehog that turns into a fatter hedgehog.
The whole language breaks down.
If anyone can't tell, this is our second episode of the night. It's 11 o'clock in the evening.
We were doing news, weren't we?
It was the first news item.
At least there aren't a lot of them.
We haven't even made it to the second thing yet. It's literally the second actual line of content in our notes. An unreleased Dune game for GBA is being released as an original IP with
Yes.
Dune branding filed off.
Yes.
The game will be called Elend: The Crystal Wars.
And you are saying Dune, not Doom.
Dune.
Yes,
Dune.
like Frank Herbert's Dune.
Frank Herbert's Dune. So yeah, if you want to play an unreleased GBA Dune game, you can.
That's a thing.
Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp delayed into spring 2022 because Nintendo wanted to ruin my Christmas, and they did.
Well, goodbye, Santa.
I'll be honest. Megaten 5 comes out in a couple weeks, and I'm already just like, what portions of my life do I need to destroy to make time for this? Because I don't even fucking know how it's going to happen. So
Can
it's
we
probably
just
for the
give
best.
away the child? Is it too late for that?
I'll just take a sabbatical from everything. I just need a cabin, a bed, and a USB-C charger. Microsoft is sunsetting the online service for the Xbox 360 Halo games.
Yeah.
Which, kudos to them for keeping it going 2 console generations later.
Right. And also those games have all been re-released as the Master Chief Collection.
Master Chief Collection.
So,
which will still continue to function.
Correct.
So
at
there
least
is
those
still an
games are
avenue to
still
play
available.
them.
Right.
Yeah. Longtime Persona series composer Shoji Meguro has left Atlus, will continue to contribute to the series as a freelancer. And this is especially painful for Persona in particular, because the Persona games are, especially 4 and 5, are so well known for their soundtracks.
I would say 3 and up are all known for their soundtracks. His soundtracks are very distinct and very especially from 3 up, but going back to the first Persona, it always really stood out against other JRPGs. Yeah. And it has continued to do so in increasingly interesting ways, to the point where I think I like the soundtrack of Persona more than I like the games.
Honestly, because I started Persona 4 a while back, and I keep trying to like push through on it, and I just make no progress. But I'll boot the game up and then leave it on all day in the background as I listen to the music, right?
Yeah,
it's one of the
fucking
few
killer
game soundtracks that I was sitting around like, man, I need to go pull this up on Spotify to listen. And it is on Spotify for people that don't know, to listen to it, just because it's in my head. It's in my head now that we've said it. It's in there and won't get out.
Yeah, watching the live performances of the woman performing the soundtrack to Persona 5 is just excellent. It's got the same level of energy that the game does, but seeing a face to associate with the vocals does add something to it. But yeah, the whole soundtrack to all of them has been excellent. So I do hope he does continue to work on the series as a freelancer, as he is saying he is going to. But it is also exciting that now he's going to be doing some freelance work as well. So
true.
Hopefully we're going to continue to see good work from him.
Yeah. And that brings us to the topic at hand. This week we're talking SimCity 2000,
which has a very different soundtrack. Very different from
very
Persona.
different. Like SimCity, but set in the far off future year of 2000. It was developed and published by Maxis, released on MS-DOS in 1993, Commodore Amiga in 1994, and Windows 3.x, Windows 95, and Mac in 1995.
And then released on a ton of other things, which we'll get to later.
Yes. So let's talk first encounters. I played. This was my first SimCity.
Oh, you didn't play the Super NES one first?
No,
Oh,
no.
wow.
I was totally unaware of it.
Oh, weird.
I do think at school one day we played. Well, let me think timeline wise. I think I played the original SimCity after 2000 at school.
Huh.
Because it was middle school. I remember that.
Oh.
But I played so much of this on my Windows XP machine.
Oh.
I mean, insane amounts. Until one day, my brother deleted my city
How dare
to
you.
get back at me for unplugging the modem while he was playing a Dragon Ball Z Quake 3 mod. And I mean, I cried for like 2 days.
That feels like such different eras to me. Quake 3 and SimCity 2000. You might as well be talking about like an Atari game next to a PS1 game. It's just so weird to hear an overlap at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we didn't have a PC growing up, really. Like my PC that I had growing up was a Windows XP machine.
Man.
Like that's my PC that I remember like being like, oh, there's games on computer that aren't Doom.
I was out of high school before XP came around.
So I was like early middle school, right? Elementary school, I mean, PCs, they were appliances in my house. It was like a refrigerator. I was never on it. I never looked at it, never cared, never whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then, yeah, that Windows XP machine. And so, and I've mentioned it before on the show. My mom used to just go like, we'd be at the store and she'd buy me computer games like on jewel case. Because back then, like Walmart, Target, Kmart, everywhere had just like tons of jewel cases, and it was like $3 for a jewel case game, and it was good shit. Right now, you do that, and it's just all like slot machine games and garbage. But back in the day, it would be like jewel case versions of bigger games.
Yeah.
You know, usually older games.
Yeah, I think they continued doing that until like 2010 or so.
Yeah, and so that's where that's where I got my copy of SimCity 2000. We were there, and I'm sure one day I was like, "Look at this cool cover," and it was probably like $2.99, and we got
a spider robot on a building.
Yeah, and so that was my SimCity 2000. Oddly enough, playing around the year 2000. So
it was no longer the far off future.
No, if anything, it was the past.
Yeah, because I think XP came out in 01.
Yeah, so it was old.
Yeah, I had. Yeah, we had learned of SimCity from the Super NES game. That was our first exposure to it. And then when we did get a PC that worked in our house, we ended up picking up the DOS version of the original SimCity. And then SimCity 2000 came out not long after that. And but it was still $50, and we couldn't spend $50 on a game. So once it dropped in price to like 20 or something on the Windows version, we picked up the Windows 3.1 port because we still had a Windows 3 computer, and I remember playing that for a while. Then we upgraded to Windows 95, and I installed that on Windows 95. And I remember being frustrated because you could still only name your cities 8 characters because it was the Windows 3 version. Actually, you could name them whatever you wanted, and it would show the name until you tried to load it the next time, because it would just load up whatever the file name was, which was 8 characters.
Right,
so,
it would just cut it off.
Yeah, it would just cut off your city name, make it all caps, and take away the spaces. But no, we did play a ton of it, and then later, many years later, I picked up the special edition CD that had the DOS, Windows 3, and Windows 95 version all on the same disc.
Right. Which must have been the version I started with.
Yeah, that's the version they continued to re-release over
because
and over and over again.
For years, not years, for a couple years now, when it hit GOG, I bought it immediately, and I was like, "Oh my god, I love SimCity 2000," and I've always maintained it's my favorite one. And I loaded up the GOG release, and I was like, "This isn't right." But it's been 2 decades since I've played it, so I can't actually say that. But this doesn't seem right. And it was not until this show, that you were like, yeah, there's the Windows 95 version. And I loaded that up, and I was like, this is it. This is my SimCity 2000.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the one that I poured the most hours into, is the Windows 3 and Windows 95 version, which are functionally the same aside from the naming issues.
Right.
And yeah, it is a different game than the DOS one, and I can't play the DOS one either. I don't like the limitations it has.
Yeah. It's funny. You go on like the GOG forums, because I was like, maybe the Win95 version is included in the GOG
Nope.
version, and you just got to do it. It's not.
Not at all.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
But in the forums, people are like, why does this say, why does this not include the Windows 95 version?
Yeah.
You know? And there are so many comments from like hardcore old school SimCity 2K fans that are like, the improvements in the Windows 95 version are negligible at best. True gamers don't need the Windows 95 improvement. In fact, it ruins the font. And I was like, what the fuck is happening, dude? It's so much better. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah. Tell me about the long and illustrious development of SimCity 2000, please.
I would love to. So I watched several hours of interviews with Will Wright from between 1993 when the game released and about the year 2000 when he was already starting to talk about what would eventually become Spore. And I've watched all these interviews, and dude never once talked about the actual development of the game. He talked all about the development of the original SimCity. He talked about how SimCity 2000 works and the concepts that the game uses and the franchise as a whole uses. He talks about how he wanted to evolve the game from 2000, and I could not find any actual conversations about like, and this is what happened when we were making the game, and this is who did this, and this is why we made this decision. Never found that at all. It was always just like, and this is how the game works. And I'm like, I get that, dude. I've been playing it for decades. Just please get back on topic. And he's like, anyway, let me talk about the raid on Bungling Bay. Please, I've heard the story 8 times now, Will.
I forgot about the Peter Molyneux level shit show that Spore was.
Yeah.
I mean, for people, and it also occurs to me that it's been many years since Peter Molyneux was really like
in the news,
the face of artisanal gaming, right? But man, Spore was like, Will Wright was just like, they hyped that.
Oh man, I was so ready for
more
it.
than they needed.
Oh yeah,
I loved it. I fucking loved that game.
I had pre-ordered the special edition. I paid like almost $100 for it. That is not $100 game, let me tell you.
No, it's not.
Before it came out, I remember me and my ex watching a video. I think it was from E3 that year that we had to download like some shitty QuickTime video of it. And it was Robin Williams playing the beta of Spore on a stage.
Wow, that is a very 2000s statement.
and it's him just playing with the character creator and making as many dicks as he can. And you can see like Will Wright getting very embarrassed in the sidelines. And it was like we watched that and we were like, we have to have this game. This is a game we need to own. And
you can make a dick monster, turn it into a civilization, and then shoot it into space.
Exactly. Like what? How is this not the perfect game? And then it finally came out, and for some reason, like my ex was busy that day. She was doing something, so I installed it and I'm playing it. And she was like, "Learn how it works so she can show me how to play it when I get home." And I'm like, when she gets home, she's like, "So how does it work?" I'm like, "I have no fucking idea. I do not know anything that happened today."
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, let's talk presentation.
Yeah.
Because the jump from original SimCity to 2000 is pretty dramatic.
There was a jump, yes.
The big thing is the perspective shift. The original SimCity was straight top down.
Right.
SimCity 2000 is that kind of isometric sort of
True.
view. I don't know why I say kind of. It is explicitly isometric.
It is isometric. Also, it is now in full color, whereas the original one was designed to work in various color modes from back in the early days of PCs. This one is very clearly 256 color VGA and up. And and so they definitely took advantage of that to make sure things were given some more detail than the original game was.
Interface wise, it's similar but upgraded, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
I know the big new interface thing they added was the long click.
That's true. Also, the fact that the toolbar is a separate floating menu that's not just like stapled to a side of the screen at all times was an improvement over the original. That gave you more visible real estate to be able to see your city on the screen.
The amount of like guides and tips and tricks I've seen of people that are like, well, you need to long press some buttons.
Yeah.
Like you long press the power button to get to the power plant, which is necessary for having a city.
That's true.
it makes me realize that was not super obvious.
No.
They explain it in the manual, but they did add a lot of context menus to the game. Right?
Click and hold was not a very established thing, especially in games. Like maybe some productivity or design tools would use it.
I don't know why it wasn't a right click.
That is a question that is probably answered by the fact that Macs did not have a second mouse button at the time.
Yeah, that was my first thought was it must be a Mac thing.
And I wouldn't be surprised if some PC users didn't have a second mouse button at the time.
I guess that's true. That's true. Because when I played the game, I forget how old it is.
Yeah.
Let's talk music. Yeah. I like the music in SimCity 2000.
Too. I love
I wish it would fucking play.
Well, depending on the speed that your computer is, it may not ever get a chance to finish a track.
I still can't quite figure out why they didn't just have it play music and fade between tracks.
Right.
But
because it's MIDI. And Microsoft's MIDI synthesizer couldn't handle fade. It certainly couldn't handle crossfade.
Well, was the Win95 one MIDI as well?
Yes, it is still MIDI.
Oh, okay.
Every version of the game you can play is MIDI soundtrack. The only versions of the game that don't use the MIDI soundtrack are the later ports.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's SimCity music. It's cute and weird and every now and then suddenly extremely dramatic for no reason while you're like, building streets.
Right, yeah. You're laying down water pipes and suddenly it's very deep music.
Yeah. So let's talk gameplay.
Yeah.
It is, as you would expect, a game in which you build a city.
True.
You lay out your roads, and it's just like in the original SimCity. You set out your zones.
Right.
You make the conditions equitable to human beings, and they will eventually fill in the gaps. Right.
I'm sorry. These aren't human beings. They're Sim citizens.
Oh, pardon me. Sims.
They weren't yet Sims. They didn't become Sims until the next game.
Oh, right.
They're still Sim citizens at this point.
Sim citizens.
Yes.
You do things like manage your budget if you're one of those crazy people that doesn't just hit the auto budget button.
Or cheat.
Which is what I do. And then you pay attention to your city's various needs as time rolls on and try to meet them to the best of your ability as things happen.
Yes.
But let's talk new stuff.
Right.
Because there's a whole lot of new stuff.
Yeah.
The biggest change is no longer are your zones kind of predetermined sizes. Because in the original game, it's like a stamp. You plop down squares.
Especially for the three major zones types, the residential, commercial, industrial, were always just the squares, just like literally every other building in the game. And every building in the game was a 3x3 square in the original one.
And this one, you kind of paint the zones.
Right. And for the pre-constructed buildings, they are different sizes, which in the original, there was a couple buildings that were different sizes.
Kind of weird.
Like power plants and stadiums and airports, but they were the exception. Whereas in this one, every building has a chance of being a different size anyway.
Yeah. But that does already introduce a new level of complexity because suddenly you have to worry about the size of your zones and the distance to roads. Right. So I didn't know this until I was playing the game for the show this time.
Okay.
But I never realized that you could not have a zone tile more than 3 squares away from a road.
Well, you can, but it won't develop.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. Like, nothing will happen. You can build it there. And so my entire life, I've been playing SimCity 2000 totally wrong. I'd build these massive zones and just drag a road around it. And
wonder why the middle was never developing.
Yeah, they would fill out some because obviously there was roads near a lot of it. Right. But then they would never fully pack in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In the later games in 3004, it kind of simplifies this as far as a design perspective by actually showing you little arrows of where they touch the road and putting blocks around where it can potentially grow. And it'll show you which areas don't have a road connection so that you know that one won't work.
Yeah.
But in 2000, it doesn't. It's just like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you'll get there. And I don't remember if this was true in the original SimCity, but it also has things where the city develops depending on how easy it is to get to free zones. So like if you build a bunch of residential commercial and you build a real long football field of of industrial, if the far end of that is too far for the liking of your sim citizens, then they'll just never develop it and they'll keep demanding industry.
Correct. Yeah, and that's how most of the games in the series have worked. The first one wasn't quite as sophisticated about it.
Yeah, I didn't think the first one quite had it.
Like it does, but the pathing in the first one is weird enough that you might not ever notice.
Yeah.
Like you can have industrial just around the perimeter of your city in the first game, and for the most part, your citizens will be like, well, that's fine. That's close enough.
Yeah. And what that means is that for the first time in the series, you're having considerations like, yes, you want to keep your industrial and your residential separate, but they also need to be close enough.
Right. People have to get to their job.
They'll actually use it. And so this is really kind of the beginning of your city really feeling like it has its own kind of personality, I guess.
Right.
Which obviously became kind of a staple of the city building genre. And I feel like this is kind of the big thing that isn't really super present in the original game. The original game, at least to me, a lot of the time almost feels like sort of a puzzle game, if that makes sense.
I can see that.
Where you're just kind of interlocking the blocks in the way that is agreeable. And this one feels very much like you're really kind of worried about the whims of your city,
Also, the original was broken in so many ways because like in the original, you could get away with only ever using rail and never
in this
placing
one, you
a road.
have to have roads.
Oh, yeah. They won't let you cheat like that. So you're going to have roads for everybody. And then also you probably want some sort of mass transit as well. And eventually you'll want highways as well, because then they can get to those further away industrial zones and not complain as much. So it does have a lot more complexity there.
Let's talk power and water systems.
No.
I do. I don't remember how the original SimCity does power. I don't remember it having power lines.
It does. Yeah, the original has power lines.
I guess I just don't remember them.
Yeah, and in the original, you only have to have a power line at the edge of each
connecting
plot.
the zones.
Yeah, and since the original has every zone as a 3x3 square, the line only has to come up to the edge of that 3x3 square. Since this one has your more painted zones, if you just have a power connection at the very edge of it, only that one square that it is touching gets power.
Right. Now, it kind of works itself out. So if you lead a power line up to a zone that you've painted, then that individual square will have that property will be more desirable. So it'll develop first.
Right. And then
anything that develops touching it will have power by touching it.
Right. In later games, they further simplified this by having implied underground power lines like we have in real life if zones are close enough to one another. You only ever needed to use power lines if there was a gap between areas. And unfortunately, that was not yet the case here. So you're still needing to have a power line over every single road in order to connect power to areas.
Right. And that isometric view and that increased density means that a lot of times, so once your city really starts developing, you don't worry so much about power. Right. It's when you build a new section, you build a road, and then you pop one power line across the street, and then everything lights up.
See, I always draw a power line through the new zone that I made. That way, any part of it can develop first all at once.
Oh, no. I pop one on the road. But by virtue of me doing that, every now and then I'll be renovating my town, and I'll destroy one critical power juncture.
Right. And suddenly that whole side of town has lost power.
But there's a delay, right? Because the game is kind of like, it's one of those games that always feels like it's kind of chugging.
Yeah.
Even when it's not.
Oh, the original SimCity worked the exact same way on that, too.
True. I guess it just felt normal because the original SimCity felt so old. You know what I mean? So yeah, I would destroy it and then I'd finish my renovations, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, why do I have no power anywhere? And then I'm like building new power plants, and then I'm like, well, no, this says it's not even at capacity. And then you realize there's you've accidentally built this one critical power juncture in your city, and then you bulldozed it.
See, I learned from playing so much of the first SimCity on Super NES to build multiple paths for power to get everywhere. Try to connect as many zones with power as possible in as many ways as possible. And I carried over that same lesson into 2000. So when once I build my little grid of roads and I've got everybody connected power-wise, then I'll go back and just plop some random power lines connecting different buildings to one another, just so they have that backup.
Planning my city such that one single power line across the road in an industrial zone being taken out would destroy my entire power grid is a bad idea?
It may require some reconsideration, is what I'm saying.
I'm not. So. And then they also add water. Water is new.
Yes.
And I will say, I do want to say
annoying.
this. It also adds the entire subterranean layer.
Right.
To the game. You can now go below the ground and look at stuff. So you can do subways, you can do water pipes. Right. I have never ever felt like the water system is overly complex or confusing, and everyone I talk to that has played this game is like, oh yeah, the water thing was confusing to me.
Yeah, water in SimCity 2000 sucks. Because you have to put a water pump next to some body of water in order to get water in the first place.
I don't believe you necessarily have to, but it has such low production without it.
Right, yeah, that's true. So it is basically required.
You kind of have to, yeah. Don't not do that. Yeah. If you don't have water, make a water tile and then put it on that.
Right. And then so that basically defines how some of your water system is going to work. And then the actual piping. So you have, so once a structure is built, then it has this water layout underneath it that is made of pipes, and you have to have a pipe that leads up to that, much like the power lines are needed. Right. And then it can spread from there to somewhere else. But a lot of these zones, especially the higher value zones, won't develop at all unless they have water, but they won't have the pipes to lead water to them until they've developed. So you basically have to run water pipes underneath all of your new zones that you've made in hopes that something will grow from them, which makes it a little costlier and a little more frustrating to put the infrastructure in place. But the bigger problem is how low the capacity, the actual production capacity is of your water pumps, that you end up needing dozens of them for even a medium-sized city.
Well, I mean, the first thing I do is I plop down about a half dozen water pumps, and then I put a water tower on the far side.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Like, that's where I start. But I also suspect that I run my water pipes the way you run your power, in that the first thing I do with any zone is I run a bunch of pipes through it.
Right.
So that when it develops, it's already got the pipes.
Yeah.
And then periodically I'll go to the subterranean layer and make sure that new stuff popping up has properly integrated itself into the infrastructure.
Right.
I've always found the power system frustrating and nonsensical, and I've always found the water system made total sense and it was fine and I liked it.
I think it's because I came from the original SimCity and it uses basically the same power system, so I was just used to that, whereas the water system is just different enough that it frustrated me. The most frustrating part to me about SimCity 2000's water system versus later games in the series is just how many water pumps it needs. It really seems silly, because in the first SimCity, and in this one for that matter, you can plop down one coal plant and it'll power a good sized city. Not like a full city, but you can get a good like eighth to a quarter of the map before you have to think about another power plant. You can get like 3 buildings before you need your second water pump. Mm-hmm. And you're constantly adding more water pumps. They run out all the time. And fortunately, later SimCity games fixed that by having the capacity of a single water pump enough that it'll probably power maybe about half as much as what a coal plant will do. And also, once you have water pipes in the general vicinity, it'll water everything in that area. So you don't have to have water pipes going to literally every single building. So they did simplify it in later games. So if you're coming from a later game, this is going to seem really overcomplicated for the water, but just think of it as very similar to the power and you'll probably figure it out.
So far, a lot of this does feel very much the first big leap into sort of more simulation aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a lot of it is still really abstracted out, especially compared to later city building games and later SimCity games. And I feel like you really see that a lot with the transportation system.
Yeah.
Which is still very abstracted.
Oh, yeah. And even though it does add some additional things,
it has a lot.
Yeah, it adds tunnels, it adds highways, more bridge types, more realistic bridges.
Yeah, bus depots.
Right.
The original didn't have bus depots.
No.
It just had rails, right?
Yeah, it's just road rail. That was your only options in the original.
Yeah.
And even then, rail was just like a second type of road.
Yeah. So it adds all of these different like infrastructure options to get your Sims around, but you really don't need to do kind of much anything in the way of like traffic or infrastructure management vis-a-vis transportation. It's mostly just like, oh, is that road congested? Cool, I'll plop a bus depot nearby and it won't be congested now.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry. You don't have to do a bus line or anything. Or, oh, you're building rail? Cool, put a depot here, a depot over there, and connect it with rails. It's done. There's no lines. There's no weirdness. It's just, you don't have to worry about flow of traffic or whatever. It's just barely there.
Yeah, it's still simplistic enough that you can pretty easily tackle the problems it throws at you.
Yeah.
And even though you have all these really neat tools in your toolkit, a lot of them are pretty extraneous, and the benefit you get from them doesn't outweigh their cost. So you're best off with your more basic tools, like you said, a bus depot.
The prevailing wisdom that I've seen is and just, as far as just standard strategy, the prevailing wisdom I've seen is make everything 6 squares wide, because then you put a road on either side and it can reach your whole zone. I've found a design of pump and hydroelectric power that I use now that is, you raise one strip. So you've got a row of raised ground. You put water at the very top or you put water around the edges of it, so it creates waterfalls on all the edges. And then you put hydroelectric power generators on every single waterfall, and then a strip of pumps along the top.
Right. Yeah, I saw that in the picture you posted. Yeah,
you get a couple rows of that, and it mostly takes care of your power and water. The power is a little weak, but it also doesn't fucking explode after 50 years.
Right. That was definitely
very frustrating.
An interesting change in this version, because in the original, the plants could last forever, really. I mean, eventually you would start seeing brownouts, and it would ask you to replace your plant, but they didn't just blow up. There was a slim chance of a nuclear meltdown if you had a nuclear plant, but it was a very slim chance.
In this one, it can be game ending.
Yeah.
If you're not watching your power plants, because you'll be like speeding along at like, what is an African swallow speed or whatever. And you're like, all right, I'm broke because I just renovated all this stuff. Or I just built a stadium or an airport or whatever. So I'm going to speed through a few years and get some tax dollars in. And then suddenly
power plant
your power plant fucking explodes. You have no money. It costs, I think the cheapest power plant is a coal one for like $5,000, $4 or $5,000. You're like, I have $300 in the bank. Everyone is leaving my town in droves. So next year I'm going to have no income. My game is over because I did not plan my power infrastructure ahead of time and check my capacity and the age of my generator before moving forward.
And you didn't cheat to have all the money.
And you didn't cheat. For some reason, I cheat like crazy in The Sims. I don't like to cheat in SimCity. I don't know why it is.
I love to cheat in SimCity just because I love to make my city as big as possible, as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I do too. I just, for some reason, and it's not that I'm like, oh, you shouldn't cheat. I just don't. It kills something for me. Like that threat of me fucking it up and the whole city just getting abandoned is like, I suspect that if I ever got good enough to really build a huge city, I probably would start cheating because I wouldn't want to lose all that progress.
That's fair.
But yeah, it really does kind of start to step into the simulation side of things. And I think we talked about this on our Mini Motorways episode. This is the level of simulation I like. It's just enough to have some nuance and some kind of complicated stuff. Granted, some of it's a little more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
But it's just enough to really put some meat on it where, like in the original SimCity, I feel like most of my time is just me sitting there staring at my city and being like, okay, I guess I'll build a thing now. Like this does give you a little bit of stuff to do moment to moment. All right, check your water pipes, check your power grid, check how old your generator is. Like you really have to kind of pay attention to it.
I still get that same feeling from the original one. And oddly, the original one is the one where I'm less likely to cheat in the first SimCity. But so I definitely get what you're coming from, but I I get that same feeling from both the original and this one, but I also kind of get that feeling from the later ones too, just because once I've learned the mechanics of them, the later ones actually feel way easier to me than the earlier ones do, despite the fact they have way more systems and way more mechanics.
I think a lot of it's probably just because the systems and mechanics make sense in later ones, and they're sometimes a little nonsensical in this one, or at least not obvious in the ways that they're obtuse.
Right. Yeah. There's a little bit of gamified cartooniness to it at this point that you have to wrap your head around. And once you get it, it's fine, but you have to put yourself in that mind space first.
Yeah. Let's talk SimCity Urban Renewal Kit.
Yes. So this
I never knew the game without the Urban Renewal Kit.
Yeah. So it was originally a separately sold expansion.
Yeah.
And it just allows you to create your own buildings, and you can redesign buildings and give them a different coat of paint, and make your own custom tile set. And it comes with a handful of pre-built tile sets. And then you can also create your own from scratch. And it was basically just a Lego kit for SimCity 2000 to make what your city would look like. And then once you load your city, you can load that tile set, and it can, at the very minimum, change the appearance of everything.
Yeah. We should also, it feels weird because I've talked to a lot of people, even before we started working on this episode, who, when they talk about SimCity, they go, "Oh yeah, man, those scenarios are great." And I have never been a scenario person. In SimCity.
I always forget they exist until they're pointed out to me.
I don't come to SimCity for an objective,
right?
And adding an objective to SimCity just kind of makes me go, "Well, I'll just go play a different game." But we would be remiss not to mention the huge amount of very interesting scenarios. I played some of them and failed at almost all of them for the show, and it's cool stuff.
Yeah,
you know, they're fun, interesting scenarios. A lot of them start with disasters that you have to deal with, and then
rebuild from and recover. And they did sell some extra scenario packs back in the day, and that's basically DLC, just the really early version from the mid 90s when DLC sold for like $20 or $30 per box, and included very little gameplay.
These days you got to buy your DLC attached to a tiny statue of Mario. That they won't make enough of.
Yeah,
so that's how
they'll sell 180 of them. They're only $7 now, but you can't find them.
The more they change, the more they stay the same.
Right.
Let's talk re-releases, expansions, and spin-offs, because
a few.
There's several.
Yeah. So, just looking at the main game on PC, just looking at the re-releases of the original, expansions, the spin-offs, you have the special edition, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's got the DOS and Windows versions, both the 16-bit and 32-bit versions for Windows. It's got the SimCity Urban Renewal Kit, or SKRK. It's got the 2 expansion packs, and it has some video interviews with Will Wright where he does not at all talk about the development of the game.
It's called Will TV.
It is called Will TV.
Will TV.
I remember when I first got, because this was one of the first games we got when we got our CD-ROM, was because we had the game on floppy disk for Windows 3, and we upgraded to this version on CD-ROM. And I was so amazed by the animated Maxis logo when you first put it in. I was like, holy shit, it's got music and video at the same time.
It's the future!
Right? Then they released the Network Edition, which was for Windows 95 and up only. It rearranged the user interface a little bit. It offered a 4-player network play. I never played this version, so I have no idea how it works. Right?
That sounds so fun.
It does require that you purchase the land that you develop your city on first, but it also starts you with more money.
Yeah.
So I am interested in how this version works, but it's never been re-released that I know of. For some reason, they kept re-releasing the special edition over and over and over again for years, but not the network edition. But I'm curious if it would even pretend to work on a modern machine. Then, of course, the spin-offs. You have SimCopter.
I had this.
Which allows you to fly a helicopter around in a SimCity to complete missions. And, of course, you could load your SimCity 2000 save file and then fly around in your SimCity, which, if your SimCity was not yet developed and was just dirt, then it was a very boring game.
Was it ever disconcerting to you that they put you in the copter? And for people that haven't played SimCity 2000, when you build an airport, which is now individual, very expensive tiles that you have to paint instead of like just building an airport.
Right.
It puts helicopters around your city that will just randomly crash and burn.
That's true. They're really bad drivers.
Like I'd feel much safer in Sim Plane than I would in Sim Copter.
Right. But yeah, and I never liked the controls in Simcopter either.
I remember playing it a couple of times and be like, this is a novelty.
Right.
But Streets of Sim City.
Yes. It's the one where
Help
you drive
me
a
out
car
here.
around.
I know you drive your car around.
Yes.
Was there a Sims or Maxis game that included vehicular combat?
I don't recall any combat in Streets of SimCity.
Because I have very distinct memories of a car combat game of some sort and Simcopter being played back to back to back for like a whole summer. And in my head, it was always Streets of Sim City. And as I got older, I was like, well, why would it be Streets of Sim City? Nobody fucking shoots missiles at each other in Streets of Sim City.
Yeah, I don't recall that, no. But it's been a very long time since I played Streets of Sim City, so I'm not going to...
I highly doubt.
Actually, I think there might be some level of combat.
Is there like a combat mode? For years, I've thought it was. I maintained for years that it was Streets of Sim City.
You know what? Just looking at the box here, the car has missiles on it on the box.
Yes, then it was. I played the shit out of this game.
I played very little of it, honestly. The main thing I remember about it was the soundtrack, because I couldn't get the game to run on my computer when I first got it, so I just got to listen to the music on the disc for a long time.
I do remember. I don't think that there's even a way to get Streets of SimCity anymore. I don't.
No, you can't legally purchase it. EA doesn't sell it.
I don't think it even runs like on modern systems. I think there's some weirdness with it.
There was some weirdness with it when it came out too.
Yeah, it was It was just.
It required some kind of video card that I didn't have at the time, so I couldn't get it to run at all.
I played it so much. Tell me about the ports for SimCity 2000.
Oh man, I'm gonna skip a lot of these.
As much as I love the game, I have played no ports of it. I played it on I had a Windows phone, not Windows phone, but like Windows CE
Windows
phone.
Mobile, yeah.
Windows Mobile. I had SimCity 2000 on there, but I think it's because I just installed the Windows 95 version.
No, it was a separate release for that.
Oh, was there a separate one?
Yes.
Well, then, yeah, I played that one. That's the only port of SimCity 2000 I've played.
So real quickly, just running through the other PC ports that are mostly the same as the original, give or take. So you got the Acorn Archimedes port in 95. You got the OS2 Warp port in 96.
Warp port.
Yeah, good old OS2 Warp. You got a port for the FM Towns in 94. You got a port for the NEC PC 98 and 95. They also released a deluxe version that was basically the special edition. And then, like you mentioned, the Windows CE port in 1999.
There it is. Yes.
And then you got the console ports, and this is where it gets a little weird. So the first console port was on the Sega Saturn in 95. Mm-hmm. They improved the graphics a little bit from the PC version. They added some animations, some weird cinematics and stuff. Otherwise, it's really close to the original for a PC or for a console port. One thing they added over the original was just awful load time. Just such shitty load time.
Yeah.
And for what was at the time a pretty brand new console, that was not a great first impression. Like I came from playing SimCity on Super NES, where it's a little slow sometimes, but it's generally responsive.
It runs fine. Yeah.
To playing SimCity 2000 on the Saturn and it running like butt. And that was unfortunate. But as far as actual gameplay goes, it's pretty functional. So if you're just looking to play it, and for some reason the only device you have is a Sega Saturn, that's fine. You can technically play the game.
Yeah, then first of all, please tell us what 1995 is like.
And then a year later, you got the PlayStation port, which was ported from the Saturn, not from the original. They just took the Saturn version, ported it to the PlayStation. Basically the same hardware, so why not? It lost all the animation from the Saturn version, so all your buildings are completely static. So they look like the Saturn versions, but without the animation. So they look very dry and bland. Otherwise, it plays basically the same. They did add the ability to view the city from a car perspective, but they used the game engine from Simcopter to do so.
Weird.
So you don't get to fly, you only get to drive. But it uses the same... Why
wouldn't they just either add Streets of SimCity engine stuff or just make Simcopter in it.
So from what I read, porting Streets of SimCity to the PlayStation was too complicated.
Oh, I see.
The system could handle Chrono Cross. It could not handle Streets of SimCity.
Right. Final Fantasy 9 was fine. Streets
Just
of
fine,
SimCity,
right.
too much. Too much
for it.
I really want to play Streets of SimCity now.
I'm guessing it was just a shit port job. That's the only guess I have. I want to say Imagineer handled both of those ports.
Yeah.
And then they also handled the Super NES port.
This blows my mind.
Which came out in 1996.
How the fuck did they...
So it's
what?
Very downgraded. I want to say it lost water altogether.
Yeah.
I want to say it lost arcologies as well. Which
we didn't even talk about.
Yeah. So the arcologies, which were the little self-contained cities. There were several random upgrades that the game had over the original that are just gone now. Also, it added the worst loading time. Holy shit. Like every time you want to rotate the camera, you just can walk away from the system for 2 minutes because it's not going to do anything.
Oh, no.
It's really bad.
Use that Street Fighter Alpha 2 cart technology.
Oh, man, it's so much worse than Street Fighter Alpha 2. It is so bad. It's definitely the worst loading I've ever seen on a cartridge. And one of the worst Super NES games. Like if this is your only way to play SimCity 2000, maybe it's best you've never played SimCity 2000. Then you have the N64 port, which came out in 97, also from Imagineer. Obviously, I've not played it because it's a Japan-only Nintendo 64 game.
Yes.
From what I read, it had some additional features, mostly mini games like a dating game. It had a TV to replace the newspaper, so it was like a little news broadcast. It had horse races and monster breeding, among other things.
I've never wanted to play a game more. They added Pokemon to SimCity in Japan.
Who knew?
God damn it. Is there a fan translation?
No, there's not.
Why?
And then 3 years later, you got the 64 disk drive port.
Yes.
Which was called SimCity 64. And rather than being a port of SimCity 2000, it is a sequel to Super NES SimCity using the SimCity 2000 engine.
I can't even...
Which sounds like the most amazing thing in the world to me. And for the last 21 years, I've wanted to play it so bad.
Yeah.
And I cannot figure out how to get the emulator to do it at all.
No.
So someday I will get SimCity 64 to work on my computer. I don't think
you just have to buy a 64 DD.
That's not going to happen. I don't believe there's a translation of this either. If there was, I didn't see it when I was looking. But
64 DD stuff is I feel critically underappreciated.
Yeah, it's so cryptic and unknown even today.
Because there's a lot of stuff that people are like, man, this looks like really awesome, and there's just as far as I can tell, not many people working on like translations or anything like that.
And also there's a lot of stuff from the 64 DD that left an impact on gaming, like that Mario Artist thing. There was a little mini game creator in there that includes most of the micro games from the first WarioWare years before WarioWare came out.
Also, it's really kind of the only sequel to Mario Paint that ever existed.
Yeah.
And I fucking love Mario Paint.
And also there's 3 Mario Artist games on the system.
Yep.
And they're all different. So it's just such a weird... Anyway.
Also, Doshin the Giant.
Oh, Doshin the Giant started on the 64 disk drive. Yep. Also, they almost made that Zelda expansion.
Yeah.
And then our last port is the Game Boy Advance port in 2003.
How bad is it?
I tried it on an emulator. It's playable. I will say that. But it is pared down. Yeah. They removed the water system. They kind of streamlined some things to make things a little bit easier, but it doesn't suffer a lot of the loading that the other console versions did, and the controls feel much better than I expected.
Well, that's good.
So if I had this when it came out, I probably wouldn't have been completely pissed off. However, I don't know that I ever would have played it because by this point I had SimCity 4.
Yeah, it was quite a bit later.
Yeah, and this was a budget release from DSi Software. If anybody remembers Destination Software, they were known for their very late budget GBA ports. My favorite factoid about DSi, their real name is Destination Software. originally founded by Richard Garriott, who you might remember.
I think you meant to say Lord British.
I'm sorry. It was founded by Lord British,
you go.
Whose previous company that he sold to EA was called Origin. And so he followed it up with a company called Destination.
You might have heard of some of these things.
Yeah, and we all know how well Destination Software turned out.
Did you ever play SimCity DS?
No, well, I own it, but I never played it.
Man, that feels very spiritually successive to Super Nintendo SimCity. It's definitely very different, but it feels very much like they're like that's what they were cribbing from, was
trying
Super
to
NES
gamify it like the Super NES one did.
Yeah, it's good. It's SimCity DS is good. If you've not played it, you should. Nice. I enjoy it. Let's talk reception. This game was very well received. Everybody liked it.
Yeah.
Very high scores across the board. According to Max's
tons of awards.
Lucy Bradshaw, SimCity 2000 achieved global sales of 3.4 million units across platforms by January 2002 and was among the best-selling PC games nearly every year from 1993 through 1999.
Yeah, that's a good run.
It was extremely successful.
Yeah.
Extremely successful.
6 years where it was among the highest selling games on the platform.
That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts.
I can't imagine a game even approaching
especially
that now.
In that era of PC gaming.
You know, I was about to say I can't imagine a game doing that, but I'm pretty sure Minecraft has done that for more than 6 years now.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
most definitely.
You know, all right.
Let's talk Legacy.
Mm-hmm. So they made another SimCity.
They did. They made. I know SimCity. It was just called SimCity.
Yeah, it was the prequel. It was 2,000 years in the past.
Yeah, there you go.
No, they made another 1,000 games to get to 3,000. No, so it was so successful that EA bought them.
Mm-hmm. Thus began the downfall.
Yeah. They still had enough creative independence to make SimCity 3000 and SimCity 4 and the Sims franchise. Those were all made under EA. Actually, I think they bought Maxis right before 3000 released, if I remember right. But it was because of the success of 2000.
Yeah.
EA obviously likes to pretend that the series isn't dead for some reason. The last attempt to revive it was that disgusting 2013 release that they inexplicably called SimCity.
That was weird.
They didn't.
I remember it came out and I was pretty excited, and
Me
then
too.
you, like, day one, you were like, "This is the worst shit I've ever spent money on."
Yes, I was so angry because the first day that I bought it, I couldn't play it. I bought the game, I installed it, and I could not play it because as much as I wanted to play SimCity, this game that I have played single player my entire life, every time I hit new city, it would say the server is at capacity.
Is it still up? Like, can you still buy? You can still. There's Jesus Christ.
And they added an offline mode like 6 months later after saying this game could never work offline.
Yeah.
Oh, I was so angry at that game.
I don't know. I don't know that EA has another SimCity in them.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've enjoyed a SimCity as much as I enjoy SimCity 2000. I keep trying to get into 3004, and there's just something about that. Something about SimCity 2000 for me. Just man, it just does it. It's just abstract and weird and complex enough that I enjoy it, and I don't have to fucking manage any fucking traffic. Which sounds weird coming from a person that said, "Hey, let's do a whole episode on mini motorways." Which we acknowledged in that episode.
Right.
I do think the Windows 95 version of the game is still very good and playable. There are some kind of oddities, like kind of needing to understand how the infrastructure stuff works, and building roads within 3 zones worth of tiles and just kind of stuff like that. But once you figure those admittedly small handful of weird complexities out, you're just kind of off city building. And you just get to enjoy it and go from there. And the game doesn't really throw a ton of curveballs at you after you get over that initial hump, which makes it a pretty smooth experience, especially compared to like more modern city builders like City Skylines, where they want to keep like, all right, now you're this city size. We're going to throw a wrench into your plans. Now you have to deal with these things. And it seems to be this increasing cascade of problems, right? Where SimCity 2000 is still late enough to have some meat on its bones, but early enough that it was still, something that you could kind of relax with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still... one way I heard it described is that the earlier simulation games, especially these earlier city builders, felt less like a complex simulation that you were trying to manage and more like a model train kit.
Yes, I would agree with that a lot.
That you just kind of put together and you play with it.
Right. Something you need to make work, but then you just play.
Yeah, and and I feel like 2000 was the peak of that for the franchise.
For sure.
Because 3000 immediately was much more difficult, especially coming from 2000. I feel like they kind of balanced out the difficulty a little more in 4, but it requires you to learn more stuff before you can manage the difficulty, so that there's a learning curve before you get there. That said, when SimCity 2000 came out, I remember there were so many books available that was how to understand SimCity 2000. I was trying to figure out if there was a SimCity 2000 for dummies, but I don't think there was a for dummies yet. But there were several unofficial guides and how to learn how to play SimCity 2000 and stuff like that. So clearly, at the time, it was seen as a very deep and complex thing. But I do agree with you. Looking back, it was still very gamey. And there was something about that sweet spot where it was still pretty gamey. So I still recommend people go back to it. I think it is fun to revisit. I enjoy the later games just as much, but even with how much I enjoy them, it was still fun to go back to it for this.
I will say, if you pick it up really anywhere, it's going to be the DOS version, which is
don't do that.
I don't care what anyone says. It's inferior.
Yeah.
The Windows 95 version can be found on archive.org.
Yes.
Installing it requires that you use
some patches.
Basically, there's a unified fan installer that if you can get the files off the disk, then you can run that installer. It sees the folder and it knows what to do with it to make it function properly.
Right.
I've been running on Windows 10 just fine on 2 different computers. It works great.
It does not seem to run on Windows 11.
You're living in the future, Saturn. That's your problem.
Right. However, I've got it running on a Windows 8 VM and it runs great. You
know what else runs great? Our Patreon at patreon.com/retrowarriors, where you can get Talking Wizards and uncut episodes of the show and just lots of other things that I'm not going to talk about because I'm tired.
Perfect.
But it would mean a lot if you would consider supporting the show. And we want to thank the following patrons who do support the show, starting with Todd Bass
and Neil Hayes,
Jurgen,
Mike Oxlong.
Sponsored by Honest Bob's Dildo and Butt Plug Emporium.
That's nice. Sean Schaller,
Alex,
Mike Morse,
Mark Meredith,
and Matthew Davis
are all the patrons we want to thank for making all of this possible and for their support. I did want to mention, we got speaking of Honest Bob's Dildo and Butt Plug Emporium, we got reached out to by our first advertiser that wanted to advertise on the show.
That's true.
And I was like, no, but it was cool.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing to have happen, right?
Right. And if you want to continue not hearing us shill for some random company, please consider donating at Patreon if you can afford it. Don't be giving us money you can't afford. We don't want that. That's dirty money. But
that's blood money.
Blood money. I have at least 2 different books called Blood Money.
Well, you read books? All right. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. And as always, let us cling together.